You're pregnant with my baby, but you hate me. Hell's angel to stranger woman that he met on 3rd of December. Isabella's hands trembled as she stared at the pregnancy test, the 2 blue lines stark and unmistakable against the white plastic. The bathroom's fluorescent light seemed too harsh, too revealing, as if spotlighting this life-changing moment she never saw coming. "No, no, no," she whispered, sinking down onto the closed toilet lid. Her free hand pressed against her flat stomach, trying to comprehend that new life was growing there, life created during that one reckless night 3 weeks ago. The memory of December 3rd flashed through her mind. The art gallery opening, celebrating her first showcase in New York, the champagne flowing freely. Then the after-party at that upscale club, where she'd locked eyes with him across the room. Luca Moretti. Even thinking his name now sent shivers down her spine. She dropped the test into the trash and splashed cold water on her face, but her reflection in the mirror offered no comfort. Dark circles had formed under her eyes from nights of restless sleep, haunted by memories of his touch, his intensity, the dangerous glint in his eyes that should have warned her away. "Get it together," she told herself firmly, though her voice quivered. Her small apartment bathroom suddenly felt claustrophobic, the walls closing in with the weight of her new reality. Isabella made her way to her living room, where half-finished paintings cluttered the space. Her latest work, a stark cityscape in blacks and grays, seemed to mock her current situation. She'd come to New York to pursue her art career, not to get entangled with a man who radiated danger from every pore. That night she'd ignored the whispers around her when he'd approached, ignored the way people stepped aside, their eyes downcast, as he moved through the crowd. She'd been too captivated by his raw magnetism, the way his dark eyes seemed to see right through her carefully constructed walls. She collapsed onto her worn sofa, hugging a cushion to her chest. The morning sickness that had driven her to buy the test in the first place roiled in her stomach again. Or maybe it was just fear. She had no illusions about who Luca Moretti was. The leather cut he wore that night, emblazoned with the Hell's Angels patch, told her enough. The way he carried himself, like a predator barely contained in human skin, told her even more. "What am I going to do?" she whispered to her empty apartment. Her hand drifted back to her stomach. Already protective instincts were kicking in, surprising her with their intensity. The thought of trying to contact Luca crossed her mind, but she quickly dismissed it. She'd seen enough that night to know his world was no place for a child. The memory of his calloused hands on her skin, the controlled violence in every movement, the whispered promises that had made her shiver, it all pointed to a man who lived in darkness. Isabella stood up abruptly, pacing her small living room. Her artistic eye caught the way the afternoon sun slanted through her windows, creating long shadows that seemed to reach for her like grasping fingers. The city beyond her window looked different now, more threatening, as if it knew her secret. The sudden ring of her doorbell shattered her thoughts. Her heart leaped into her throat. For a moment, she stood frozen, staring at the door as if it might disappear. The bell rang again, more insistent this time. With legs that felt like lead, Isabella moved toward the door. Through the peephole, she saw him, Luca Moretti, looking even more dangerous in the harsh hallway light than he had that night. He wore all black, his broad shoulders filling the frame of her doorway, his presence commanding even through the tiny lens. Her hand shook as she reached for the doorknob. When she opened it, his intense gaze locked onto hers immediately, pinning her in place with its force. "We need to talk," he said, his deep voice sending tremors through her body. "Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today?" Now back to the story. The bass thundered through Isabella's body as she stepped into Obsidian, one of New York's most exclusive nightclubs. December 3rd, a date that would change everything, though she didn't know it yet. The warmth of several martinis hummed in her veins, making the lights blur into streaks of blue and purple across her vision. Her black dress clung to her curves, a splurge for her first successful gallery showing. Tonight was about celebration, about proving that a small-town girl could make it in the big city. She'd sold 3 paintings, enough to keep her lights on for another month. "Another drink?" her friend Sarah shouted over the music, already waving down a bartender. Isabella nodded, sweeping her dark hair over one shoulder. The dance floor pulsed with bodies, but something else caught her attention. A weight, a presence, like being watched by a predator. Across the room, hidden in shadow, Luca Moretti sat in a leather booth, his fingers wrapped around a glass of whiskey. His dark eyes tracked Isabella's every movement. The vest beneath his leather jacket bore the patches of the Hells Angels, but most patrons were too afraid to look closely enough to notice. "The brunette at the bar," his associate Marco muttered. "She's been asking questions about our operation." But Luca wasn't listening to Marco's concerns. There was something about the way she moved. Confident but innocent, sexy without trying. She didn't belong in his world of blood and violence, and that made him want her more. Isabella felt it again, that electric tension. She turned, scanning the crowd, until her gaze collided with his. The air left her lungs. He was darkness personified, broad shoulders, sharp jawline, eyes that promised danger. The kind of man her mother had warned her about. She should have looked away, should have grabbed her purse and run. Instead, she held his stare, defiant. The corner of his mouth ticked up, a predator's smile. "Who is that?" she asked Sarah, trying to sound casual. Sarah followed her gaze and paled. "That's Luca Moretti. They call him the Beast. You don't want anything to do with him, Bella, trust me." But the warning came too late. Luca was already rising from his booth, his movements fluid and purposeful. The crowd parted for him instinctively, like prey clearing a path for a lion. Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs. He was even more imposing up close, tall enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. A scar ran along his jaw, telling stories of violence she didn't want to know. "Dance with me." His voice was gravel and whiskey, rough but smooth. It wasn't a request. "I don't even know you," she countered, proud that her voice didn't shake. His laugh was dark. "You know enough to be afraid, but you're not running." He was right. Despite every instinct screaming at her to flee, she remained rooted to the spot. The heat of his body radiated against her, making her skin tingle. Without warning, his hand shot out, fingers wrapping around her wrist. Not painful, but firm enough to show his strength. He pulled her away from the bar, away from Sarah's wide-eyed warning look, into a shadowed corner where the music was slightly muffled. Isabella's back hit the wall. Luca's arms caged her in, his massive frame blocking out the rest of the club until her world narrowed to just him. His scent enveloped her, leather and smoke and something dangerously male. The morning light sliced through floor-to-ceiling windows, forcing Isabella's eyes open. Her head throbbed, and for a moment she couldn't remember where she was. The silk sheets against her bare skin felt foreign, nothing like her cotton ones at home. She blinked, trying to orient herself. The room was massive, minimalist yet luxurious, with stark white walls and modern art pieces that probably cost more than her yearly salary. The Manhattan skyline stretched out beyond the windows, buildings gleaming in the early sun. "Oh, God," she whispered, clutching the sheet to her chest as memories started flooding back in fragments. The club. The mysterious man. Those dark, intense eyes that had seemed to look right through her. Her body ached in places that told their own story, even if her mind couldn't piece it all together. She touched her neck, feeling tender spots that would surely turn to bruises. Evidence of passion she could barely remember. The sound of running water caught her attention. The bathroom door was slightly ajar, steam escaping through the gap. Her heart rate doubled. He was still here. Isabella scanned the room for her clothes, finding them scattered across the floor. Her little black dress lay crumpled near the bed, one heel by the door, the other somewhere. She needed to leave, now, before the water shut off. Isabella froze, sheet clutched to her chest, as Luca emerged from the bathroom. A towel hung low on his hips. Water, droplets trailing down his tattooed chest. The ink told stories of violence and brotherhood. Skulls, angels, declarations of loyalty to his motorcycle club. "You're awake." His voice was deep, controlled, nothing like the heated whispers she vaguely remembered from the night before. Isabella swallowed hard. I should go. Breakfast first." It wasn't a question. He moved to a sleek dresser, pulling out fresh clothes with the casual confidence of a man completely at ease with his nudity. She watched him, unable to look away from the scars that marked his body. Bullet wounds, knife fights, each one a reminder of who he was, what he was. "I really should eat." He cut her off, his tone brooking no argument. "You had a lot to drink last night." The mention of alcohol made her head throb harder. "I don't usually. This isn't..." "What? The type of thing good girls do?" A hint of amusement colored his voice as he pulled on black jeans. "You seemed pretty sure about what you wanted last night." Heat flooded her cheeks. Flashes of memory, his hands on her body, her nails scoring his back, the way he'd growled her name, made her squeeze her eyes shut. "I can't remember everything," she admitted quietly. He paused in the middle of buttoning a black shirt. Something dark passed over his face. "You were conscious, enthusiastic even. I don't fuck drunk women who can't consent." The crude language made her flinch, but oddly, she believed him. Despite everything, despite his reputation, and the dangerous energy that radiated from him, she didn't feel afraid. Overwhelmed, yes. Confused, definitely. But not afraid. She gathered her courage and stood, keeping the sheet wrapped around her. "Where are my clothes?" He gestured around the room. "Where you left them, after you practically tore them off." Another flash of memory. Her, pushing him against a wall, demanding. Her cheeks burned hotter. As she gathered her clothes, trying to maintain some dignity while clutching the sheet, Luca watched her with those unnervingly intense eyes. She ducked into the bathroom to change, grateful for the moment alone to collect herself. When she emerged, he was fully dressed in all black, looking every bit the dangerous man she knew him to be. A cup of coffee sat on the nightstand, steam rising invitingly. "Drink," he ordered, then pulled something from his pocket. A business card, stark white with just a phone number in black. No name, no title. He placed it next to the coffee. "If you need anything," he said, his eyes holding hers, "you call. I mean anything, Isabella." The way he said her name sent shivers down her spine, familiar, possessive. She nodded, not trusting her voice. "And Isabella?" He moved closer, his presence overwhelming. "No surprises. I don't like surprises." The sterile walls of the doctor's office seemed to close in around Isabella as the nurse's words echoed in her mind. "Congratulations. You're definitely pregnant." Her fingers gripped the edge of the examination table, the paper crinkling beneath her touch. That can't be right, Isabella whispered, more to herself than to the cheerful nurse who was busy typing notes into her computer. We were careful, at least I think we were. The memories of that night were still hazy, fragments of passion and desire that didn't quite piece together into a complete picture. The nurse turned to her with a sympathetic smile. Would you like me to go over your options? We have several pamphlets. No, Isabella cut her off, perhaps too sharply. I mean, not right now. I just need... She didn't know what she needed. Time? Space? A miracle? Her hand instinctively moved to her flat stomach. Somewhere inside her, a life was growing. Half her, half him. Half Luca Moretti, the man whose dangerous reputation preceded him, whose touch still burned in her memories. The drive home was a blur. Isabella pulled into her apartment complex's parking lot and killed the engine, but couldn't bring herself to get out of the car. The afternoon sun filtered through the windshield, warming her skin, but inside she felt cold. She opened her purse, fishing through its contents until her fingers brushed against the smooth surface of his business card. She'd kept it, telling herself it was just in case, never really believing she'd need it. The card was simple, elegant, just his name and a phone number in raised black letters. No mention of his connection to the Hells Angels, nothing to hint at the power he wielded in New York's underworld. What am I supposed to do? She asked the empty car, her voice breaking. The art gallery showing that had brought her to New York seemed like a lifetime ago, though it had been just weeks. She'd been so proud, so full of hope about her future. Now everything was complicated by one night. One man, one mistake. Isabella traced the edges of the card with her thumbnail, remembering how he'd pressed it into her palm that morning. His touch had been gentle then, a stark contrast to the intensity of the night before. If you need anything, he'd said, his dark eyes holding hers. Anything at all. She'd thought he was just being polite, or maybe assuaging his own conscience after their wild night together. Now those words took on a different meaning entirely. Her phone felt heavy in her hand as she pulled it from her purse. She had to tell him. Whatever his reaction might be, whatever this meant for her future, he had a right to know. And she needed to know what kind of man she'd gotten herself tangled up with. Isabella's fingers shook as she dialed the number. Each ring seemed to last an eternity, her heart pounding harder with each one. Just when she thought it might go to voicemail, there was a click. Moretti. His voice was exactly as she remembered it. Deep, commanding with an edge that sent shivers down her spine. She took a deep breath, willing her voice to remain steady. It's Isabella. From December 3rd. There was a long pause, and she wondered if he even remembered her. But then... Isabella. The way he said her name, like he was savoring it, made her stomach flip. I didn't expect to hear from you. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to focus. This wasn't about attraction or the chemistry that still crackled between them, even over the phone. This was about her future, about the life growing inside her. We need to talk. The words came out cold, defensive, masking the storm of emotions churning inside her. Isabella's breath caught in her throat as she stared up at Luca Moretti. He filled her doorway, his broad shoulders blocking out the hallway light behind him. The leather of his jacket creaked as he moved, bringing with it the scent of expensive cologne and danger. How did you find me? Her voice came out smaller than she intended. His dark eyes swept over her face before moving past her to scan her apartment. I have my ways. He stepped forward, forcing her to back up or be pressed against his chest. Are you going to invite me in? It wasn't really a question. Isabella's hands trembled as she wrapped her arms around herself, watching him move into her space like he owned it. His presence made her modest apartment feel tiny, claustrophobic. "I was going to call you," she said, closing the door slowly. The click of the latch felt final, trapping her in with him. "Were you?" His tone was flat, disbelieving. He touched the edge of a painting on her wall, one of her own, his fingers trailing along the frame. "When?" "Today, actually. She swallowed hard, watching him prowl around her living room. "I just found out." Luca turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "And you thought waiting was wise?" "I needed time to process." Heat crept into her cheeks. "This isn't exactly how I planned my life to go." "Life rarely goes as planned." He moved closer, and Isabella fought the urge to step back. "How far along?" 6 weeks. The words felt like stones in her mouth. "The doctor confirmed it this morning." His jaw tightened. "December 3rd. "Yes." That night, the night that had turned her world upside down. Fragments of memories flashed through her mind, his hands on her skin, his mouth on hers, the way he'd made her feel things she'd never felt before. "Sit down, Isabella." He gestured to her small couch. She bristled at the command. "I prefer to stand." A muscle ticked in his jaw. "Please." The word sounded foreign coming from him, like he rarely used it. Isabella moved to the couch, perching on the edge. Luca remained standing, looming over her. "What are your intentions?" he asked. "My intentions?" She blinked up at him. I haven't decided anything yet." His expression darkened. "There's nothing to decide. You're carrying my child." "Excuse me?" Anger flared in her chest, giving her courage. "This is my body, my life. You don't get to make that decision for me." In an instant, he was kneeling before her, one hand gripping her knee. The touch sent electricity through her body, unwanted but undeniable. "Listen carefully, Isabella. I'm not some random man you can shut out of your life. That's my child growing inside you." "We barely know each other," she protested, trying to ignore how his thumb was making small circles on her knee. "One night doesn't give you the right to—" "One night was enough to create this situation." His other hand moved toward her stomach, hovering for a moment before pressing gently against it. The warmth of his palm seeped through her thin shirt. "You're carrying my child. You're not doing this alone." Isabella opened her mouth to argue, but he cut her off. "No more decisions without me." His voice was low, commanding, brooking no argument. His dark eyes held hers, and in them she saw something that made her breath catch. Possession, protection, and something darker she couldn't name. Isabella's hands shook as she threw clothes into her overnight bag, her movements frantic and desperate. The walls of her small apartment seemed to close in around her, suffocating her with each passing second. Luca's presence behind her was like a dark shadow, watching, waiting. "This is insane," she muttered, grabbing another handful of clothes. "You can't just walk in here and take over my life." Her fingers fumbled with the zipper of her bag. The sound of Luca's footsteps approaching made her heart race faster. She had to get out of here, had to escape before— Isabella made a break for the door, but she didn't make it 2 steps before his strong hand caught her arm. With one fluid motion, he yanked her back, spinning her around until her body collided with his hard chest. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs. "You don't get to walk away from this," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. His grip on her arm wasn't painful, but it was firm enough to show he meant business. "Let go of me." Isabella struggled against his hold, but it was like fighting against steel. "You have no right. I have every right." His dark eyes bore into hers. That's my child you're carrying. One night, she spat. One stupid night doesn't give you the right to control my life. His jaw clenched. This stopped being about just one night the moment you got pregnant. Tears of frustration burned in Isabella's eyes. I don't even know you. You're a stranger, a dangerous one at that. I've heard the whispers about what you do, what you are. Then you know running isn't an option. His free hand came up to cup her face, the gesture surprisingly gentle despite his harsh words. The moment people find out you're carrying my child, you become a target. My enemies would love nothing more than to hurt what's mine. Isabella's blood ran cold. I'm not yours. A dark smile curved his lips. You are now. Both of you are. She tried to step back, but his arm around her waist held her firmly in place. This is crazy. I won't live like this. You don't have a choice, Luca said, his tone softening slightly. I protect what's mine, Isabella, always. Whether you like it or not, you need me now. Need you? She laughed bitterly. I need you like I need a bullet to the head. His expression hardened. You think this is a joke? There are people out there who would hurt you just to get to me. I won't let that happen. The reality of her situation started to sink in. She was carrying a child, his child, and everything she thought she knew about her life was crumbling around her. Her dreams of a normal life, her independence, her freedom, all of it slipping away. Come with me to my penthouse, Luca said, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. I can protect you there. And if I refuse? His eyes darkened. That's not an option. I'm not asking, Isabella. She looked up at him, seeing the determination etched into every line of his face. This man, this dangerous, powerful man, wasn't going to let her go. She was trapped, caught in a web she never meant to enter. With a defeated sigh, Isabella nodded slowly. Fine, but this doesn't mean I'm okay with any of this. You don't have to be okay with it, Luca replied, finally releasing his hold on her. You just have to accept it. He moved to pick up her half-packed bag, his movements precise and controlled. Isabella wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly feeling cold despite the warmth of her apartment. She knew in that moment that her life would never be the same again. She was now part of his world, a world of danger, power, and darkness, whether she wanted to be or not. The elevator doors opened silently to Luca's penthouse, and Isabella's breath caught in her throat. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the glittering New York skyline, the city lights twinkling like stars against the darkening sky. The space before her was a study in masculine luxury, all clean lines, dark leather, and gleaming surfaces. Luca's hand pressed against the small of her back, guiding her forward. His touch, though gentle, sent shivers down her spine. She couldn't tell if it was from fear or something else entirely. Welcome home, he said, his voice low and gravelly. The words made her stomach clench. This wasn't home. This was a cage, no matter how beautiful. Isabella wrapped her arms around herself, feeling small and out of place in her simple jeans and sweater. Everything about the penthouse screamed money and power. An enormous abstract painting dominated one wall, its swirls of red reminding her of blood. Crystal decanters filled with amber liquid caught the light from recessed fixtures, and a sleek grand piano stood in one corner, its polished surface reflecting the city lights. You'll stay in the guest suite, Luca said, moving past her with the casual confidence of a predator in his territory. For now. The implied threat in those two words made her skin crawl. I don't want to be here, she said, hating how her voice trembled. Luca turned, his dark eyes pinning her in place. What you want stopped mattering the moment you decided to carry my child." Before she could respond, his phone buzzed. The change in his demeanor was immediate and chilling. His jaw tightened, and his eyes turned to ice as he answered the call. "Speak," he commanded into the phone, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. Isabella watched as he paced, his movements reminding her of a caged tiger. She couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but Luca's responses made her blood run cold. "If you touch what's mine again, I'll skin you alive." His voice was calm, almost conversational, which made the threat even more terrifying. "Tell your boss that the next time he sends his dogs to sniff around my territory, I'll send them back in pieces." Isabella's hand flew to her mouth, her stomach churning. This was the reality of the man she'd gotten involved with. Not just the dangerous lover from that one passionate night, but a true monster who spoke of violence as casually as discussing the weather. Luca ended the call and turned to her, his expression softening fractionally when he saw her pale face. "This is my world, Isabella. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be." She backed away until she hit the cool glass of the window. "You're insane if you think I'll ever accept this." He closed the distance between them in 3 long strides, caging her against the window with his arms. "You don't have a choice. There are people out there who would hurt you just to get to me. I won't let that happen." His proximity was overwhelming. The scent of his cologne, expensive and masculine, filled her nostrils, and she could feel the heat radiating from his body. Despite her fear, despite everything she'd just witnessed, her traitorous body responded to him. "I hate you," she whispered, but the words lacked conviction. Luca's lips curved into a cold smile. "Hate me all you want, Kara. But remember this, you're carrying my child, and that makes you mine to protect, whether you like it or not." Another call interrupted them, and this time, Isabella watched as Luca switched seamlessly into his role as a feared criminal leader. His voice turned sharp, his Italian flowing smoothly as he issued what could only be orders. She didn't need to understand the language to recognize threats when she heard them. Standing there, trapped between the cold glass and Luca's dangerous presence, Isabella felt the full weight of her new reality crash down on her. This wasn't just about her anymore. The child growing inside her would be born into this world of violence and power, and there was nothing she could do about it. Isabella's heels clicked against the polished floor of Inferno, one of New York's most exclusive nightclubs. The bass thundered through her chest as Luca's hand pressed firmly against her lower back, guiding her through the crowd. She couldn't help but notice how people parted before them like waves breaking against rocks. Everyone seemed to know exactly who he was. The VIP section loomed ahead, elevated above the dance floor and wrapped in velvet ropes. 2 burly security guards nodded respectfully as Luca approached, stepping aside without a word. Isabella felt the weight of dozens of eyes following their movement. "Stay close," Luca murmured, his lips brushing her ear. His breath was warm against her skin, making her shiver despite the club's heat. The leather booth wrapped around a private table stocked with premium bottles. Isabella sank into the plush seat, hyper-aware of Luca's thigh pressing against hers as he settled beside her. His arm draped possessively across the back of the booth, not quite touching her shoulders but marking his territory all the same. "You don't have to hover so close," she said, trying to maintain some semblance of control. "I'm not going anywhere." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "That's not why I'm staying close, Bella." His dark eyes scanned the crowd below with predatory focus. "There are wolves everywhere." As if summoned by his words, a man appeared at their table. He was handsome in a polished way, wearing an expensive suit that screamed old money. but something in his eyes made Isabella's skin crawl. "Moretti," the man said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Quite the surprise seeing you here, and with such lovely company." The change in Luca was instant and terrifying. The casual way he'd been holding himself vanished, replaced by coiled tension. His jaw tightened, and though his expression remained neutral, his eyes turned to ice. "Vito." Luca's voice was deceptively soft. "You're a long way from your territory." Isabella felt the air grow thick with tension. Beneath the table, Luca's hand found her knee, squeezing once, a warning to stay still. Vito's gaze slid to Isabella, lingering too long on her body. "Aren't you going to introduce us? It's not like you to be rude." "No." The single word carried enough venom to make Isabella's breath catch. "Shame." Vito leaned forward, bracing his hands on their table. "I heard whispers that you've been distracted lately. Now I see why. Tell me, sweetheart, do you know what kind of man you're sitting next to?" Before Isabella could respond, Luca moved. One moment he was beside her, the next he had Vito by the throat, slamming him against the nearby pillar. The music continued to pound, but nearby conversations died instantly. "You look at her again." Luca's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried clearly to Isabella's ears. "You speak to her, you even think about her, and they'll never find all the pieces." Vito's face was turning red, but he managed a strangled laugh. "You've gone soft, beast. A woman and a baby? That's not like you at all." Isabella's blood ran cold. How did he know about the pregnancy? Luca's response was swift and brutal. His fist connected with Vito's jaw with a sickening crack. As Vito stumbled, Luca's knee drove into his stomach, doubling him over. The entire exchange took seconds, but the violence of it stole Isabella's breath. "Get her out of here," Luca barked to someone over his shoulder. Two of his men materialized from the shadows, moving to flank Isabella. She watched, frozen in horror, as Luca dragged Vito through a back door, his movements precise and lethal. The last thing she saw before his men ushered her away was the cold, calculating look in Luca's eyes, the look of a man about to do something terrible. The club erupted into chaos behind them as they led her to the exit. Screams pierced the air, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs, her hands trembling as she was guided into a waiting SUV. Through the tinted windows, she saw Luca emerge from the club's side door, straightening his jacket as if he'd merely stepped out for air. There wasn't a hair out of place, no sign of the violence she knew had just occurred. He walked with the same confident stride as always, leaving whatever horror he'd unleashed behind those doors. Isabella stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of Luca's penthouse, her reflection ghostly against the glittering New York skyline. The events at the club kept replaying in her mind, the swift, brutal efficiency with which Luca had handled the threat. Her hands trembled as she wrapped her arms around herself. Behind her, she heard the soft clink of ice against glass. Luca had been unusually quiet since they returned, the tension in his shoulders visible even through his expensive suit jacket. He approached, offering her a glass of water while he nursed what looked like whiskey. "You're afraid of me now." It wasn't a question. His voice was low, almost resigned. "Should I be?" Isabella turned to face him, searching his face for any trace of the coldness she'd witnessed earlier. Luca's jaw tightened. He moved to the leather couch, loosening his tie with one hand. "Sit with me, Isabella." She hesitated, but something in his expression made her comply. As she settled onto the opposite end of the couch, Luca stared into his glass, the amber liquid catching the dim light. "I was 12 when I saw my first murder," he said quietly. My father's right-hand man, the man who taught me how to ride a bike, was executed for betraying our family. His knuckles whitened around the glass. They made me watch. Isabella's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected this vulnerability from him. My mother left when I was 3. Couldn't handle my father's life. The violence. He took a long drink. By 15, I was running collections. By 18, I had my first kill order. His eyes met hers, dark and haunted. This life, it's not something I chose. It chose me. Luca. Isabella found herself moving closer, drawn by the raw pain in his voice. The man at the club tonight? He set his glass down. He would have hurt you to get to me. In my world, showing mercy means losing everything, or everyone, you care about. His hand reached out, hesitating before brushing against her arm. I can't let that happen. Not to you. Not to our child. The warmth of his touch sent shivers through her. For the first time, she saw beyond the ruthless exterior to the scars beneath. When I was 20, he continued, his voice rougher now, I lost someone. Sophia. She was innocent, like you. His eyes closed briefly, the memory clearly painful. A rival family used her to send a message. I found her. He stopped, his whole body tense. Isabella's hand moved of its own accord, covering his. You don't have to. I do. His fingers intertwined with hers. You need to understand why I am the way I am. Why I can't let you just walk away from this. From me. The city lights cast shadows across his face as he told her about years of betrayal, of learning to trust no one, of building walls so high that no one could breach them. He spoke of the Hell's Angels becoming his real family, of the brotherhood that gave him purpose when he had nothing else. The world sees me as a monster, he said, his thumb tracing circles on her hand. The beast, they call me. Maybe they're right. But with you... He paused, struggling with words that seemed foreign to him. With you, I want to be something else. Isabella felt tears prickling at her eyes. The man before her was so different from the cold, controlling figure who had dominated her life these past weeks. This Luca was raw, human, wounded in ways that made her heart ache despite herself. Everything I've done, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Every life I've taken, every brutal choice, it was all about survival. But now... His eyes dropped to her stomach, where their child grew. Now it's about protection, about keeping what matters safe. He moved closer, his presence no longer threatening but somehow comforting. His arm slipped around her waist, drawing her against his chest. His other hand found her belly, spreading warm and protective over the slight swell there. Isabella felt the change in him, the softening of his usual rigid control, the gentleness in his touch. When she looked up, his eyes held none of their usual coldness. Instead, they were filled with something that made her breath catch, a tenderness she never thought possible from a man like him. The penthouse was quiet, except for the soft hum of the city below. Isabella stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the lights of New York twinkle, like stars caught in a web of concrete and steel. Her reflection stared back at her, and she could see the slight swell of her belly beneath her oversized sweater. Behind her, Luca's presence filled the room like a gathering storm. She heard his footsteps, measured and deliberate, moving closer. Her heart picked up its pace, but she refused to turn around. You're thinking too hard, his deep voice rumbled close to her ear. The heat of his body radiated against her back, and she suppressed a shiver. That's rich, coming from the man who's holding me prisoner in his gilded cage, Isabella shot back, but her voice lacked its usual bite. The events at the club still haunted her, the way he'd moved with lethal grace, the cold efficiency in his eyes as he'd dealt with the threat. Yet here he was, his touch gentle as his hands came to rest on her shoulders. "Is that what you think this is?" His fingers traced down her arms, leaving trails of fire in their wake. "A prison?" Isabella turned to face him, ready with a sharp retort, but the words died in her throat. Luca's eyes were different tonight, softer somehow, yet no less intense. The usual hardness had given way to something that made her chest tight with unwanted emotion. "What else would you call it?" she managed to say, even as he stepped closer, backing her against the cool glass. Her pulse thundered in her ears. "Protection," he murmured, one hand coming up to cup her face. His thumb traced her bottom lip, and she couldn't stop herself from parting them slightly. "Safety." His other hand settled on her waist, pulling her closer. "Necessity." The space between them crackled with tension. Isabella knew she should push him away, should maintain the walls she'd built since discovering her pregnancy. But her body betrayed her, leaning into his touch like a flower seeking the sun. "Luca," she breathed, half warning, half plea. He didn't hesitate. His mouth claimed hers with a hunger that stole her breath. The kiss was nothing like their first night together. This was deeper, more dangerous. His tongue swept past her lips, tasting her like a man starved. Her hands fisted in his shirt, torn between pushing him away and pulling him closer. The kiss tasted of violence and tenderness, of the darkness she'd witnessed in him, and the unexpected gentleness he showed only to her. His hand tangled in her hair, tilting her head back to deepen the kiss, while his other hand pressed protectively against her stomach. Isabella moaned into his mouth, hating herself for wanting this, for wanting him. He was everything she should run from. A criminal, a killer, a man who lived by his own brutal code. Yet here she was, melting into him, her body recognizing its match even as her mind screamed in protest. Luca groaned, the sound vibrating through her chest. He kissed like he fought, with absolute conviction and deadly precision. Each sweep of his tongue, each nip of his teeth drove her closer to surrendering completely. But it was that thought, surrender, that finally broke through the haze of desire. With a gasp, Isabella planted her hands on his chest and pushed. Hard. Luca allowed her to break the kiss, but he didn't step back, keeping her caged between his body and the window. Her chest heaved as she tried to catch her breath, tried to rebuild her defenses. The taste of him lingered on her lips, a reminder of how easily he could breach her. Walls. "I hate you," she whispered, the words lacking conviction even to her own ears. Luca's eyes darkened, but not with anger. A small, knowing smile played at the corners of his mouth as he looked down at her, completely unfazed by her declaration. The morning sun filtered through the penthouse windows as Isabella gathered her things. After days of being cooped up in Luca's fortress, she needed to get out, even if just for a quick errand. She'd left a note for him, knowing he'd be furious, but she refused to live like a prisoner. Her heels clicked against the concrete of the underground parking garage. The sound echoed off the walls, making her quicken her pace. Something felt off. The hair on the back of her neck stood up as she approached her car, keys clutched tightly in her hand. That's when she noticed it, the small puddle beneath her car. Her steps faltered as she drew closer, her heart beginning to race. The dark liquid wasn't oil. It was too thin, too red. Her phone buzzed in her purse. Unknown number. "Look under your car, sweetheart." Isabella's breath caught in her throat. With trembling hands, she crouched down, careful to keep her distance. A small package was taped to the undercarriage, wires visible in the dim light. The phone buzzed again. Now you know what happens when the beast lets his guard down. Tick-tock. Her legs nearly gave out as she stumbled backward. The garage suddenly felt massive and suffocating all at once. Every shadow could hide a threat. Every sound could be a trigger. She forced herself to think through the panic. Running would draw attention. Walking too slowly could be fatal. She measured her steps, trying to appear casual while her heart thundered in her chest. The elevator was too obvious, the stairs too enclosed. She headed for the street-level exit, her palm pressed protectively against her stomach. Tears threatened to fall, but she blinked them back. Crying wouldn't save her or her baby. A car engine roared to life somewhere in the garage. Isabella's pace quickened. The exit was 30 feet away. 20. 10. Footsteps echoed behind her, heavy and purposeful. She broke into a run, abandoning all pretense of calm. The morning sun was just visible through the exit door's window when a hand grabbed her arm. Isabella screamed, twisting away with all her strength. Her attacker cursed as she connected with something solid. His nose, maybe. She didn't stop to check. She burst through the exit door onto the sidewalk, nearly colliding with a group of pedestrians. The city noise was deafening after the garage's silence. People stared as she ran, her designer dress and perfectly styled hair a stark contrast to her terror. "Isabella!" Luca's voice cut through the chaos. She spun around to see him emerging from a black SUV, his face carved from stone. Two of his men flanked him, weapons visible beneath their jackets. She collapsed into his arms, her whole body shaking. "The car. There's something under—" "I know." His voice was deadly calm. "My men are handling it." He pulled back just enough to look at her, his eyes scanning for injuries. His thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "You're safe." But there was more than concern in his expression. Rage simmered beneath the surface, barely contained. His jaw clenched as he pressed her closer, one hand still resting protectively over her stomach. "They wanted me to see it," she whispered. "They left a message. They're dead men walking." The words were a promise, delivered with chilling certainty. He guided her toward the SUV, his body positioned between her and the street. "But you're never leaving my side again." Isabella started to protest, but the words died in her throat. The terror was still too fresh, the reality of their situation too clear. This wasn't just about her anymore. Their baby's life was at stake. Luca helped her into the vehicle, his touch gentler than she'd ever felt it. But as he slid in beside her, she saw his mask slip back into place, the beast emerging, ready for war. Isabella paced across the marble floors of Luca's penthouse, her footsteps echoing in the vast space. The morning sun cast long shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows, but she barely noticed the spectacular view of New York City spread out below. Her mind was too busy racing with questions, fears, and growing suspicions. The attack on her car yesterday wasn't random. She knew that now. Someone had targeted her specifically, cut her brake lines, left a warning note. The message was clear. She wasn't safe, and neither was her unborn child. When Luca strode into the living room, his presence filled the space like a gathering storm. He wore a black suit that fit him perfectly, but there was tension in his shoulders she hadn't noticed before. "We need to talk," Isabella said, forcing herself to meet his dark gaze. "About?" His voice was calm, controlled, too controlled. "Am I just a pawn to you?" The words burst out of her. "Are you using me, using this baby, as leverage in whatever war you're fighting?" Luca's jaw tightened. He moved closer, and Isabella had to force herself not to step back. "Watch what you're saying." "No." She lifted her chin. "I deserve answers. Someone tried to kill me yesterday. This isn't about protecting me anymore, is it? This is about you using me to draw out your enemies." His hand shot out, gripping her arm. Not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to make her pulse jump. "Everything I do is to protect you." "Really?" She tried to pull away, but his grip held firm. "Because it feels like I'm caught in the middle of something bigger, something you're not telling me." Luca's other hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheek in a gesture that was surprisingly gentle. "You think I'd put you in danger? Put our child in danger?" The tenderness in his touch made her anger waver, but she pushed through it. "I think you're hiding something from me. I think there's more to this than you're saying." His dark eyes searched her face. "There are things you don't need to know. Things that would only put you in more danger. That's not good enough anymore." Isabella placed her hand over his chest, feeling his heart beating steady and strong beneath her palm. "I'm carrying your child. I'm living in your home. I deserve to know what I'm dealing with." Luca's phone buzzed, breaking the tension between them. He checked it, his expression hardening. "We'll finish this later." "Of course we will," she muttered, watching as he headed toward his office. "Because you always get to decide when conversations end." He paused at the door, throwing her a look that made her shiver. "Stay in the penthouse today. No exceptions." Before she could argue, he disappeared into his office, closing the door firmly behind him. Isabella stood there for a long moment, frustration and fear warring inside her. She started to turn away, but voices from behind the door caught her attention. Moving closer, she pressed her ear against the heavy wood. She could hear Luca's voice, low and dangerous, speaking to what sounded like multiple people. "Someone feeding information to the Romeros," she heard him say. "Someone close." Another voice responded, "We've narrowed it down to 3 possibilities, boss." "I want names. Marco, Tony, or—" The voice dropped too low for her to hear the third name. "Watch them," Luca commanded. "But don't let them know they're being watched. Whoever this rat is, they're going to lead us straight to the Romeros." Isabella's hand unconsciously went to her stomach as she listened. A traitor in Luca's ranks? Someone feeding information to his enemies? No wonder he was being so secretive, so protective. But as she stepped away from the door, her mind spinning, a new fear took root. If someone close to Luca had betrayed him, how could she be sure she could trust him? How could she know he wasn't using her as bait in an elaborate trap to catch his enemies? The baby kicked, as if sensing her distress. She rubbed her belly gently, trying to calm both herself and the child within. "What have we gotten ourselves into?" she whispered. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Luca's penthouse bedroom, casting long shadows across the luxurious space. Isabella lay awake, her head resting on silk sheets as she studied the man sleeping beside her. In sleep, Luca's face lost its hardness. The sharp angles softened, the perpetual scowl smoothed away. He looked almost peaceful, almost human. Her hand drifted to her slightly swollen belly, a reminder of why she was here. The baby. Their baby. The thought still felt surreal, like a dream she couldn't quite shake off. Luca stirred, his muscular arm tightening around her waist. Even in sleep he was possessive, protective. She should hate it, hate him, but something had changed. The wall she'd built between them was crumbling, brick by brick, and it terrified her. "Stop thinking so loud," Luca mumbled, his voice rough with sleep. His eyes opened, dark and intense as they fixed on her face. Isabella tried to look away, but his hand caught her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. "I heard you last night," she whispered, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "The meeting with your men." his body tensed against hers, all traces of sleep vanishing. You were supposed to be resting. How can I rest when your enemies are plotting against you? The words came out sharper than intended. When someone close to you might be a traitor? Luca sat up, the sheets pooling around his waist, revealing the tattoos that marked his skin, each one telling a story of violence and power. My enemies are always plotting, Isabella. It's the nature of my world. Our world, she corrected him, surprising herself. I'm carrying your child. Whatever affects you affects us now. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, but his eyes remained serious. Then you understand why I need to handle this my way. Isabella pushed herself up, facing him. By shutting me out? By treating me like I'm just another possession to protect? You're not. He cut himself off, running a hand through his dark hair in frustration. This isn't about possession. This is about keeping you safe. Safe from what, Luca? From your enemies? From your own men? She pressed her hands against his chest, feeling his heart beating steady and strong beneath her palms. How can I trust you when you won't trust me? His hands covered hers, holding them against his chest. The warmth of his skin seeped into her, making her breath catch. Trust is earned in my world, Isabella. Every person who's betrayed me started as someone I trusted. I'm not them, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I'm carrying your child. She stopped, unsure how to finish that sentence. What was she to him, really? Luca's expression softened, and he pulled her closer, one hand sliding to rest on her belly. The tenderness of the gesture contrasted sharply with the dangerous man she knew him to be. This was the contradiction that drew her to him, despite her better judgment. The beast who could be gentle, the killer who could love. You're different, he admitted, his thumb tracing circles on her skin. You make me want things I've never wanted before. Peace, a future, a family. His jaw clenched. But my enemies would use that against me, use you against me. Isabella placed her hand over his where it rested on her stomach. Then let me help you. Don't push me away because you're afraid. His eyes flashed at that. I'm not afraid. Aren't you? She challenged, holding his gaze. Afraid of letting someone in? Afraid of losing control? For a long moment he just stared at her, the muscle in his jaw working. Then his hand covered hers, his voice low and commanding. You're mine, Isabella. I'll protect you. But you need to trust me. All of me. Isabella's heart pounded as she rushed through the dimly lit hallway of Luca's penthouse. The sound of raised voices and shattering glass echoed from his office. She pressed her back against the wall, her hands instinctively cradling her stomach as she listened. You think I wouldn't find out? Luca's voice carried through the door, cold and deadly. That I wouldn't notice someone feeding information to Vito's crew? Another crash made Isabella jump. Thunder rolled outside, the gathering storm matching the tension in the air. Boss, I can explain. A voice she recognized as Marco, one of Luca's most trusted lieutenants, trembled with fear. Explain? The word came out as a growl. My woman, my child, were almost killed because of your betrayal. Isabella's breath caught in her throat. Marco had been kind to her, always bringing her tea in the mornings and asking about her well-being. The revelation of his betrayal made her stomach turn. More voices joined the chaos inside, other members of Luca's inner circle, she assumed. The sound of a scuffle broke out, followed by cursing and the thud of bodies against furniture. Unable to stand by any longer, Isabella pushed the door open. The scene before her froze her in place. Marco was on his knees, blood trickling from his split lip. Two of Luca's men held his arms while Luca himself towered over him, his knuckles raw and red. Isabella. Luca's voice softened slightly when he saw her, but his eyes remained glacial. Get out. She shook her head, taking a step forward. Luca, please. This isn't something you need to see. His jaw clenched as he turned back to Marco. Take him to the warehouse. I'll deal with him there. Lightning flashed outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the room in stark white for a moment. In that flash, Isabella saw the pain beneath Luca's rage, the hurt of betrayal etched into the lines of his face. As his men dragged Marco away, Isabella remained rooted to the spot. Luca braced his hands against his desk, his shoulders rigid with tension. The storm outside grew stronger, rain pelting against the windows like bullets. He was your friend, she whispered. There are no friends in this life. Luca's words were bitter. Only allies and enemies. Isabella moved closer, her heart aching despite herself. This was the world she'd been drawn into, a world where trust was as fragile as glass, and betrayal meant death. Yet watching Luca struggle with this pain made something shift inside her. You trusted him, she said softly. Luca turned to face her, his eyes dark with emotion. I trust no one completely, except... He cut himself off, running a hand through his hair in frustration. Except... She took another step closer. Thunder crashed again as Luca closed the distance between them. His hands came up to frame her face, surprisingly gentle despite the violence they'd just delivered. Except you, he admitted roughly. God help me, but I trust you. The confession hung heavy in the air between them. Rain continued to pour outside, creating a curtain of water that isolated them from the rest of the world. Isabella's hands found their way to his chest, feeling his heart hammer beneath her palm. I would never betray you, she whispered, surprising herself with the truth of it. Luca pulled her into his arms, one hand settling protectively over her growing belly. His embrace was fierce, possessive, yet tender in a way that made her breath catch. Nothing will touch you, he vowed against her hair. No one will come between us. I'll burn this city to the ground before I let anyone hurt you or our child. The storm raged on outside, but in Luca's arms, Isabella felt an unexpected sense of safety. Even as she knew he was about to leave, to deal with Marco in ways she didn't want to imagine, she couldn't deny the connection between them anymore. This dangerous man, this beast everyone feared, had become her shelter in the storm. The rain pelted against the bulletproof windows of Luca's safe house, a modern fortress disguised as a luxury apartment building. Isabella pressed her forehead against the cold glass, her breath fogging the surface as she watched the street below. Her hands instinctively cradled her growing belly, seeking comfort in the small movements within. The silence was deafening. Hours had passed since Luca left with his men, his last words to her still echoing in her mind. Stay inside. No matter what you hear, don't open the doors. A convoy of black SUVs rolled down the street, their headlights cutting through the darkness. Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs as she recognized Luca's imposing figure emerging from the lead vehicle. Even from this distance, his presence commanded attention. He moved with lethal grace, his men falling in behind him like shadows. The rival gang members didn't stand a chance. The street erupted in chaos as gunfire shattered the night. Isabella flinched but couldn't look away. Luca moved through the violence like a force of nature, precise and devastating. His reputation as the Beast wasn't just for show. She watched him take down 3 men without breaking stride. Through the rain-streaked glass, she saw flashes of brutality that made her stomach turn. But what terrified her most wasn't the violence itself. It was how her heart raced, not with fear, but with a twisted sort of pride. This dangerous man, this creature of darkness and blood, was fighting to protect her, to protect their child. The guards posted outside her door shifted nervously as the sounds of combat drew closer. Isabella heard muffled shouts, the distinct pop of gunfire, and then an eerie silence fell over the building. Her fingers dug into the windowsill as she waited, every muscle tense. Heavy footsteps approached. The door burst open, and Luca filled the frame, his presence electric and dangerous. Blood spattered his expensive suit, staining the crisp white shirt underneath. His knuckles were split and raw, his chest heaving with exertion. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, wild with adrenaline and rage until they landed on her. The transformation was instant and absolute. The murderous fury melted away, replaced by something softer, almost vulnerable. In 3 long strides, he crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. His embrace was fierce, desperate, as if he needed to convince himself she was real. "You're the only thing that matters," he whispered into her hair, his voice rough with emotion. The hands that had dealt death mere minutes ago now cradled her with infinite gentleness. Isabella felt the rapid beat of his heart against her cheek, the tremor in his muscles as the adrenaline slowly faded. She should have been repulsed, should have pushed him away, run from this man who wore violence like a second skin. Instead, she found herself clinging to him, breathing in his scent, gunpowder, rain, and something uniquely Luca. In his arms, surrounded by his strength, she felt safer than she ever had before. "Are you hurt?" she asked, her fingers tracing the blood on his shirt. She couldn't tell how much of it was his. His hand covered hers, pressing it against his chest. "Nothing that matters." His other hand drifted to her belly, protective and possessive. "The threat has been eliminated. No one will dare come near you now." Isabella shivered at the dark promise in his words. This was her reality now, loving a man who could switch from tender lover to merciless killer in the blink of an eye. A man who would burn the world to keep her safe. He tightened his hold on her, as if sensing her thoughts. "You're the only thing that matters," he repeated, his words a vow against her skin. "The only thing that brings me back from the darkness." Isabella's hands trembled as she stuffed clothes into her overnight bag. The safehouse's silence felt suffocating, broken only by distant sirens and the occasional burst of gunfire. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she moved through the dim bedroom, gathering essentials. She paused at the dresser, catching her reflection in the mirror. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her complexion had grown pale with worry. Her hand drifted to her stomach, still flat but carrying the precious secret that bound her to this dangerous world. "What kind of life would this be for you?" she whispered to her unborn child. The events of the past few hours replayed in her mind. She'd watched from the window as Luca led his men into battle, his movements precise and lethal. The violence had been unlike anything she'd ever witnessed. Brutal, efficient, and completely at odds with the tender way he'd touched her just that morning. Isabella zipped up her bag, then froze at the sound of heavy boots in the hallway. Not Luca's. He moved like a predator, silent and deadly. These were unfamiliar footsteps. Her pulse quickened as she pressed herself against the wall beside the door. The footsteps passed, and she released a shaky breath. This was exactly why she needed to leave. Every shadow held a threat, every sound a potential enemy. She couldn't live like this, constantly looking over her shoulder, wondering if today would be the day Luca's enemies finally reached her. She thought of the way he'd looked earlier, commanding his men with cold precision. The Luca who held her at night, who whispered promises against her skin, seemed worlds away from the man who dealt death without hesitation. Yet they were the same person, the tender lover and the ruthless killer. Moving to the window, Isabella peered out at the city below. The streets were eerily empty, the usual bustle of New York replaced by an ominous quiet. Somewhere out there, Luca was fighting his war, spilling blood to protect what he considered his, including her. Her fingers brushed against the window glass, cool and solid. Like Luca's walls, it separated her from the world outside, a world that suddenly seemed both terrifying and inviting in its normalcy. The baby kicked, a tiny flutter that made her pause. "I'm doing this for you," she murmured, though the words felt hollow even to her own ears. Isabella grabbed her bag and moved toward the door. Her hand reached for the handle, but she hesitated. Images flashed through her mind. Luca's rare smiles, reserved only for her. The way his eyes softened when he touched her growing belly. The fierce protectiveness that radiated from him whenever she was near. A shadow fell across the doorway, and her breath caught in her throat. She knew without turning that it was him. His presence filled the room like a physical force, dark and commanding. "Going somewhere?" Luca's voice was dangerously soft. Isabella's grip tightened on her bag. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered, still facing the door. "The violence, the constant fear. It's too much." She heard him move closer, felt the heat of his body behind her. His hand settled on her hip, possessive and unyielding. "Turn around," he ordered. When she didn't move, his other hand gripped her shoulder, spinning her to face him. His eyes were dark with barely contained fury, but beneath that, she saw something else. Fear. Fear of losing her. "You're not leaving me," he growled, pulling her against his chest. His arms formed an iron cage around her, and her bag dropped forgotten to the floor. Before she could protest, his mouth crashed down on hers in a kiss that stole her breath and scattered her thoughts. The kiss held all the violence of his world, but also the desperate need that drove him. His fingers dug into her hips as he pressed her against the door, marking her as his territory, claiming her with a possessiveness that made her knees weak. The night air crackled with tension as Luca paced his penthouse like a caged animal. His phone lay shattered against the wall where he'd thrown it moments ago after receiving the video. Isabella. His Isabella. Bound and terrified in some warehouse, her captors taunting him through the screen. His men watched from a safe distance as he demolished everything within reach. The usually controlled crime boss had snapped, his facade of cool calculation replaced by pure animalistic fury. The beast wasn't just a nickname anymore. It was a promise of what was coming. "They're dead," he snarled, his voice barely human. "Every single one of them." His fist connected with the marble counter, leaving a crack. Blood dripped from his knuckles, but he didn't seem to notice. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, lightning split the sky. A storm was brewing, matching the darkness in Luca's eyes. His lieutenant, Marco, approached cautiously with a burner phone. "We found them, boss. Old factory district. They've got about 30 men, heavy artillery." Luca's jaw clenched. "Call everyone. I want every brother we have. Tonight we show them why they call me the Beast." His words carried the weight of death itself. Within an hour, the underground parking garage filled with the rumble of motorcycles. 50 of his most loyal soldiers, armed to the teeth, ready to follow him into hell itself. The air thick with exhaust fumes and the promise of violence. Luca strapped on his Kevlar vest, checking his weapons with mechanical precision. His hands steady now, deadly calm replacing the earlier rage. This wasn't just about territory anymore. This wasn't about business. They'd taken his woman, his unborn child. There would be no mercy. They thought they could use her against me. He addressed his men, his voice carrying across the garage. They thought she was my weakness. A dangerous smile curved his lips. Tonight, they learned she's my strength. Rain pelted against the concrete as they prepared to move out. Thunder rolled overhead as Luca mounted his black Harley, the machine growling beneath him like a predator ready to strike. His men fell in behind him, a small army of leather-clad warriors on steel horses. Across town, in an abandoned warehouse, Isabella struggled against her restraints. Her wrists were raw from the rope, but she refused to show fear to her captors. The rival gang's leader, Vito, watched her with cold amusement. "Your beast is coming," he taunted, circling her chair, "and when he does, he'll walk right into our trap." Isabella lifted her chin defiantly. "You don't know him like I do," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "You have no idea what you've done." Vito laughed, but there was an edge of uncertainty in it. His men were nervous, jumping at shadows. They'd heard the stories about the beast. Some had seen him in action. None wanted to be here when he arrived. Through the grimy warehouse windows, lightning illuminated the night sky. The storm grew stronger, wind howling through the broken panes. Isabella could feel it in her bones. Something was coming. Something terrible and wonderful. Then she heard it, the distant rumble of motorcycles, growing louder with each passing second. Her captors heard it too, their faces paling as the sound multiplied. Not one bike, but many. An army of them. Through the rain-streaked windows, she saw the first headlights appear. Then more, and more. An endless stream of them cutting through the darkness like angry stars. At their head, she recognized Luca's massive form, his leather jacket gleaming wet in the storm. The rival gangs scrambled to their positions, weapons raised, but Isabella could see the fear in their eyes. They'd wanted to trap the beast, but instead, they'd unchained him. Now he was coming with all his fury, all his power, all his love. Thunder cracked overhead as the bikes surrounded the warehouse. Isabella's heart pounded in her chest, equal parts terror and anticipation. Through the window, she watched Luca dismount his bike, his movements fluid and deadly, his men formed up behind him, an army of shadows in the storm. The final battle was about to begin. Isabella's heart pounded against her ribs as rough hands pushed her through the dimly lit warehouse. The smell of rust and motor oil filled her nostrils, making her stomach turn. 2 men flanked her, their fingers digging into her arms hard enough to bruise. "Keep moving," one of them growled, shoving her forward. Through the grimy windows, she caught glimpses of the setting sun painting the sky blood red. The warehouse stretched endlessly, filled with shipping containers and forgotten machinery. Her captors led her deeper into the maze-like structure, their footsteps echoing off concrete walls. The leader, a man with a jagged scar across his jaw, turned to face her. "Your beast is going to learn a hard lesson tonight." He grabbed her chin, forcing her to look at him. "No one crosses the devils and lives to tell about it." Isabella jerked away from his touch, earning herself another rough shove. "He'll kill you all," she spat, one hand protectively covering her stomach. The scarred man laughed, the sound hollow and cruel. "That's what we're counting on. He'll come charging in here like the animal he is." He gestured to the warehouse around them. "And we'll be ready." In the distance, the distinctive rumble of motorcycles grew louder. Isabella's heart leaped. She knew that sound. Luca was coming. The warehouse erupted into activity. Men with guns took positions behind crates and containers. The scarred leader dragged Isabella behind a stack of metal drums, using her as a shield. "Let's see how your beast handles this." The first explosion rocked the building's foundation. Glass shattered somewhere in the darkness. Gunfire erupted, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Isabella could hear shouts and screams, the chaos growing closer with each passing second. Through the mayhem, she caught glimpses of what was happening. Luca's men moved like shadows through the warehouse, efficient and deadly. But it was Luca himself who commanded. Attention! He fought like a man possessed, his movements precise and lethal. Each punch, each shot brought him closer to her. "Luca!" she screamed when a bullet whizzed past her head. "Shut up!" The scarred man pressed his gun against her temple. But Isabella had seen enough of Luca's world to know what would happen next. She dropped her weight suddenly, throwing her captor off balance. The gun went off, the shot going wide. Luca's roar of rage echoed through the warehouse. He appeared like a demon through the smoke, his eyes burning with fury. The scarred man tried to aim, but Luca was faster. The fight was brutal, but brief. Isabella watched as Luca unleashed all his pent-up violence on her captor, his fists connecting with devastating force. When it was over, Luca stood among the fallen, his chest heaving. Blood splattered his white shirt, none of it his own. His eyes found Isabella's, and the transformation was immediate. The rage melted away, replaced by desperate need. He crossed the space between them in 3 long strides, pulling her into his arms. His hands roamed over her body, checking for injuries. "Did they hurt you?" His voice was rough, strained with emotion. Isabella shook her head, pressing herself against his chest. Despite everything, the violence, the danger, the blood, she felt safe. Here, in the arms of the most dangerous man she'd ever met, she was home. "I'm never letting you go," Luca growled against her hair, his arms tightening around her. The warehouse still echoed with distant gunfire as his men cleared the building, but in this moment nothing existed except the 2 of them. Isabella closed her eyes, breathing in his familiar scent of leather and gunpowder. She should have been terrified by what she'd witnessed, by the brutality of his world. Instead, she felt only relief. Because she knew now, without any doubt, that Luca would tear apart heaven and hell to keep her safe. His hand came to rest on her stomach, protective and possessive. Around them the chaos began to settle, but Luca didn't move. He held her like she was the only thing anchoring him to sanity, like she was the answer to every question he'd never dared to ask. The warehouse floor was slick with blood, the metallic scent heavy in the air. Isabella's heart thundered against her ribs as she watched Luca step over fallen bodies, his chest rising and falling with each deep breath. His dark eyes, usually cold and calculating, now burned with an intensity that made her shiver. "Are you hurt?" His voice was rough, barely controlled as he reached for her. His hands, still warm from violence, ghosted over her arms, her shoulders, her face, checking for injuries. Isabella shook her head, unable to find her voice. The events of the past hour played through her mind like a nightmare. The squealing of tires, the sound of gunfire, the awful crunch of bones breaking under Luca's fists. She had seen him fight before, but this had been different. This had been pure savagery. "Look at me," Luca commanded, his fingers tilting her chin up. Blood spattered his white shirt, a stark reminder of what he was capable of. "I told you no one would take you from me." Outside, the rumble of motorcycles grew louder as his men secured the perimeter. The warehouse's metal walls seemed to vibrate with their approach, but Isabella couldn't tear her gaze away from Luca's face. Despite everything, the violence, the danger, the darkness of his world, she felt safe in his presence. "I thought..." Her voice cracked. I thought they were going to kill me." Luca's jaw clenched, a muscle ticking beneath his skin. "Never." The word came out like a growl. "I would burn this whole city to the ground before I let anyone hurt you or our child." His hand moved to her stomach, protective and possessive. The baby, their baby, kicked as if sensing its father's presence. Isabella watched as Luca's expression softened for a fraction of a second, that brief glimpse of tenderness that only she ever got to see. The sound of footsteps echoing through the warehouse made Luca tense. He shifted, positioning himself between Isabella and the approaching threat, but it was only one of his lieutenants. "Boss, perimeter's secure. No survivors." Luca nodded sharply, dismissing the man without taking his eyes off Isabella. She could see the adrenaline still coursing through him, his body coiled tight like a spring ready to snap. His hands, when they cupped her face, trembled slightly. "I saw what they did to you," Isabella whispered, reaching up to touch the gash above his eyebrow. "How you fought through all of them to get to me." "I would do it again," he said, his voice dropping low. 1,000 times over. You're mine to protect." The words should have frightened her. Once they would have made her bristle with defiance. But now, after everything they'd been through, after watching him tear apart anyone who dared threaten their future, she understood. This was Luca's way of loving. Fierce, possessive, absolute. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Luca's men moved with practiced efficiency, already cleaning up the evidence of the carnage. Through the warehouse's broken windows, Isabella could see the sky beginning to lighten, the first hints of dawn breaking through the smoke. "We need to move," Luca said, his arm wrapping around her waist. "But first..." He pulled her closer, his forehead resting against hers. For a moment, they just breathed together, the chaos around them fading into background noise. Isabella felt the steady thump of his heartbeat against her chest, strong and sure, a reminder that they had survived. Luca slowly sank to his knees before her, his hands spanning her waist. Even kneeling, his presence was commanding, dangerous. But when he pressed his lips to her stomach, the gesture was achingly gentle. "You're mine forever," he murmured, his dark eyes lifting to meet hers. The warehouse echoed with the aftermath of violence. Isabella's heart pounded as she watched Luca move through the carnage, his white shirt stained crimson, his eyes still blazing with lethal focus. Bodies littered the concrete floor, a testament to what happened when someone dared to touch what belonged to Luca Moretti. "Are you hurt?" His voice was rough as he reached for her, hands surprisingly gentle as they skimmed over her body, checking for injuries. The contrast between his blood-covered knuckles and his tender touch made her shiver. "I'm okay," Isabella whispered, one hand instinctively moving to her stomach. "We both are." A muscle ticked in Luca's jaw as his phone buzzed. The message made his expression darken further. "It's not over." He pulled her closer, his arm a steel band around her waist. "Vito's still out there. This was just the first wave." The rival gang leader's name hung in the air like poison. Isabella had heard enough about Vito to know he was the puppet master behind her kidnapping, the man who'd orchestrated everything from the shadows. "Sir," one of Luca's men burst through the door, breathing hard. "We found something. Documents in the office upstairs. Vito's been planning this for months. He's got people inside your organization." Luca's grip tightened on Isabella. "Names?" "3 of them, including..." The man hesitated, glancing at Isabella. "Say it." "Marcus, your right-hand man." The betrayal hit like a physical blow. Isabella had seen Marcus at Luca's side nearly every day, always watchful, always loyal, or so they'd thought. Luca's laugh was cold and hollow. Of course. He pressed a kiss to Isabella's temple, but there was nothing tender about it. It was a marking, a claim. Marcus helped set up our security. He knew exactly how to get to you. What are you going to do? Isabella asked, though she already knew the answer. End this. Luca's phone buzzed again. This time his smile was predatory. Vito's getting desperate. He's calling for a meeting. Wants to negotiate. It's a trap, Isabella said immediately. Of course it is. Luca turned to his men. Get her to the safe house. Double the security, triple it. His eyes met Isabella's, and for a moment she saw past the violence to the vulnerability beneath. I'm not losing you. Either of you. Luca. Trust me. His hands framed her face, thumbs brushing her cheekbones. I know you hate this world, hate what I am, but everything I've done, everything I'm about to do, it's for you, for our family. Isabella wanted to argue, to tell him there had to be another way, but she'd seen enough of his world now to know better. Sometimes violence was the only language these men understood. Footsteps thundered down the hallway as more of Luca's men arrived. They brought news. Vito had been spotted at an abandoned factory on the outskirts of town. Marcus was with him. Time to finish this. Luca's voice carried across the warehouse, commanding and cold. His men moved with practiced efficiency, checking weapons, securing exits. Be careful, Isabella whispered as he prepared to leave. Luca's kiss was fierce and possessive. Always am, Angel. His hand lingered on her stomach. Wait for me. She watched him stride away, every line of his body coiled with lethal purpose. The beast was going hunting, and God help anyone who stood in his way. The last thing she saw before his men escorted her out was Luca barking orders, his face set in stone. He looked exactly like what he was, a man ready to burn the world down to protect what was his. No one touches my family, she heard him growl. No one. Through the warehouse windows, she caught a glimpse of black motorcycles roaring to life, their engines a war cry in the night. Luca led them, a dark, avenging angel astride his machine, heading straight for the final confrontation with the man who'd dared to threaten everything he held dear. Isabella stood at the window of Luca's penthouse, her hand resting on her growing belly as the morning sun painted New York's skyline in shades of gold. The past few months had been a whirlwind of violence and passion, but now, in this quiet moment, she felt something she never expected. Peace. Behind her, Luca moved with his usual predatory grace, but there was something different about him now. The hardness in his eyes had softened whenever he looked at her, though the dangerous edge that made him feared throughout the city remained. The nursery is almost ready, he said, his deep voice sending shivers down her spine. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, his large hands covering hers on her stomach. My men finished painting it last night. Isabella couldn't help but smile at the image of feared Hell's Angels members carefully painting nursery walls. Pink? She asked, remembering their heated debate about the color. Light gray, he growled against her ear, with pink accents, a compromise. She leaned back into his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. The same heart that had seemed so cold when they first met, now beat with a warmth she'd come to rely on. I never thought I'd be here, she admitted softly. That night at the club, I was so scared of you. Luca's grip tightened slightly. And now? Now I'm scared of how much I need you. His hand slid up to cup her face, turning her toward him. The morning light caught the silver in his dark eyes, reminding her of the dangerous man he was, the man who'd torn through his enemies to keep her safe. But those same hands that dealt death now touched her with infinite gentleness, I had the security system upgraded again, he said, his thumb tracing her bottom lip. No one gets within a mile of this place without me knowing. Isabella nodded, understanding the necessity. The war might be over, but Luca's world would always be dangerous. The doctor said everything looks perfect, she changed the subject, knowing how much he worried about the baby. She's growing strong. A rare smile crossed his face. She? Just a feeling. Luca led her to the plush couch, pulling her down beside him. The penthouse had changed since she'd first arrived. Softer touches here and there, photos of them together, her art supplies scattered across a desk by the window. It was no longer just his space, but theirs. I had Marco check the hospital security, he said, his hand returning to her stomach. Private wing. My men on every floor. Nothing will go wrong. Isabella covered his hand with hers. Where once his controlling nature had infuriated her, she now understood it came from a place of love. Fierce, possessive, all-consuming love. We still have 3 months. 3 months to make everything perfect. His eyes darkened with determination. No one will ever hurt either of you. She turned to face him fully, taking in the man who'd changed her world. The dangerous biker, the feared enforcer, the tender lover, all parts of him that she'd come to accept and love. His scars told stories of violence, but his touch spoke of devotion. I love you, she whispered, the words still new on her tongue. Both sides of you. Luca pulled her closer, his forehead resting against hers. The gesture was intimate, vulnerable, something he showed only to her. You changed everything, he murmured. Made me want more than just power and respect. Made me want this. His hand spread across her belly protectively as he looked at her, a softness in his eyes that she'd never seen before. We're in this together, forever. The morning light filtered through the penthouse windows, casting long shadows across Isabella's face as she stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows. Her hand rested on her swollen belly, now prominently showing at 6 months. The city below buzzed with its usual energy, but up here, in Luca's fortress, everything felt different, calmer, safer. She heard his heavy footsteps before she felt his presence behind her. Luca's arms wrapped around her, his large hands covering hers on her stomach. His touch, once frightening, now brought comfort she never thought possible. You're up early, he murmured against her neck, his voice still rough with sleep. Isabella leaned back into his chest, allowing herself to relax into his embrace. The baby was restless. She turned her head slightly, catching the softness in his usually hard eyes. Your son takes after his father, always on high alert. A small smile tugged at Luca's lips. The expression transformed his face, erasing the hardness that had become so familiar during the recent war. My son, he repeated, pride evident in his voice. Still can't believe it sometimes. The past few weeks had been quieter since Luca had eliminated the last of his enemies. The violence that had defined their early relationship had given way to an uneasy peace. His reputation as the Beast had only grown stronger after the brutal way he dealt with those who'd threatened Isabella, but around her, he showed a gentleness that still surprised her. The doctor called yesterday, Isabella said, turning in his arms to face him. Everything looks perfect, healthy and strong. Luca's hand moved to cup her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. Like his mother. His eyes darkened slightly. The new security detail starts today. I want you protected, even now. Isabella nodded, having learned to accept certain aspects of Luca's world. The protection wasn't negotiable, especially not with their child on the way. I know. I saw them arriving earlier. They're very thorough. They better be, Luca growled, his protective instincts flaring. After everything that's happened, I'm not taking any chances. Isabella reached up, placing her hand on his chest, feeling his heart beating steady and strong beneath her palm. We're safe now, Luca. You made sure of that? She paused, remembering the violence that had led to this peace. Sometimes I still can't believe how much has changed since that night at the club. Luca's expression softened as he looked down at her. You changed everything, Isabella. You and our son. He led her away from the windows to the kitchen, where breakfast was already laid out, a spread fit for a queen, prepared by his staff. As they sat down to eat, Isabella watched him reading messages on his phone, his brow furrowed in concentration. Even in these quiet moments, she could see the weight of his responsibilities, the constant vigilance required to maintain his position and keep them safe. The club meeting went well last night? She asked, picking up a piece of toast. Luca set down his phone, giving her his full attention. Yes. The other chapters understand our new direction. Things will be different now. He reached across the table, taking her hand. More legitimate businesses, fewer risks. For him. His eyes dropped to her belly. Isabella squeezed his hand, understanding the magnitude of what he was saying. Luca was restructuring his entire empire, shifting away from the more dangerous aspects of his business, all for their family. I never thought I'd have this, he admitted quietly, vulnerability showing through his usual mask of control. A woman who knows all of me and stays. A child. A future that's more than just survival. The baby kicked then, as if responding to his father's voice. Isabella smiled, guiding Luca's hand to feel the movement. His eyes widened slightly, that rare, genuine smile returning to his face. I love you, she said softly, the words no longer feeling like a betrayal of her former self. Both the beast and the man. Luca's eyes locked with hers, intense and filled with emotion. You're my everything now, Isabella. You and our son. Nothing else matters. The Italian coast stretched before them like a painted masterpiece, waves lapping gently against the pristine shore. Isabella stood on the balcony of their private villa, her hand resting on her growing belly as she breathed in the salty air. After months of violence and chaos, the peace felt almost foreign. Behind her, Luca's footsteps approached, quiet but deliberate. She'd learned to recognize his presence without turning, the way the air seemed to shift around him, the subtle change in atmosphere that always accompanied his arrival. His arms encircled her waist, hands covering hers over their unborn child. You look beautiful in the sunlight, he murmured against her ear. The tenderness in his voice still surprised her sometimes, so different from the cold calculation she'd first known. Isabella leaned back against his chest, allowing herself to relax into his embrace. It's strange, she said softly, being somewhere without guards, without looking over our shoulders. My enemies know better now. His grip tightened slightly, protective rather than possessive. But you deserve this peace, Bella. Both of you do. The villa was secluded, nestled in the hills overlooking the Mediterranean. Luca had arranged everything, the private jet, the discreet staff who disappeared like shadows, the security systems that let them truly be alone. It was the first time since that fateful December night that they could just be. Come, Luca said, taking her hand. He led her down the stone steps to the private beach below. Isabella's bare feet sank into the warm sand, and she couldn't help but smile. Here, with the sun warming her skin and Luca's hand in hers, the darkness of their past seemed distant. They walked along the shoreline, letting the gentle waves wash over their feet. Isabella studied Luca's profile, The sharp jaw that used to seem so threatening now looked more noble than dangerous. The scars that marked his skin told stories she finally understood. "I never thought I'd have this," she admitted, stopping to face him. "When you first showed up at my door, I was terrified of you, of your world." Luca's dark eyes softened as he traced her cheek with his thumb. "And now?" "Now I'm terrified of losing you." The words came out barely above a whisper, carried away by the sea breeze. He pulled her closer, one hand splayed across her back while the other cradled her face. "That will never happen, amore mio. Everything I've done, every life I've taken, every drop of blood I've spilled, it was all to ensure no one could ever separate us." The old Isabella might have flinched at such words, but she'd learned to see the love beneath the violence. Luca was who he was, a dangerous man who'd carved out his place in a brutal world. But he was also the man who whispered Italian lullabies to their unborn child, who held her through nightmares, who would burn the world down to keep her safe. They settled on a blanket in the sand. Isabella nestled between Luca's legs, her back against his chest. The sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. For once, there were no phone calls about territory, disputes, no urgent meetings with the club, no threats lurking in the shadows. "Tell me what you're thinking," Luca's voice rumbled against her back. Isabella intertwined her fingers with his. "I'm thinking about how different everything is from what I planned. I was supposed to be a simple art teacher, living a quiet life. Instead, I'm carrying the child of the most feared man in New York. And somehow—" She turned to meet his gaze. "Somehow it feels right." His eyes darkened with emotion as he leaned down to capture her lips in a kiss that spoke of possession and devotion. When they parted, he pressed his forehead to hers. "You were never meant for a simple life, Isabella. You were meant to be mine." The waves continued their eternal dance with the shore as the last rays of sunlight painted them in golden hues. In this moment, they weren't the feared Hell's Angel and his pregnant lover. They were just Luca and Isabella, two souls who'd found each other in the darkness and refused to let go. Isabella stood on the balcony of their private villa overlooking the Mediterranean, her hands resting on her swollen belly. The sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, a far cry from the dark world they'd left behind in New York. The warm breeze carried the scent of jasmine and salt water, wrapping around her like a gentle embrace. Strong arms encircled her from behind, and Luca's large hands covered hers on her stomach. His touch, once terrifying, now brought comfort she couldn't imagine living without. The baby kicked against their joined hands, making Isabella smile. "Someone's active today," Luca murmured, his voice softer than anyone who knew him as the Beast would believe possible. His thumb traced circles on her belly, and Isabella leaned back against his chest. "She knows her daddy's here," Isabella said, closing her eyes as Luca pressed a kiss to her neck. The gesture was tender, nothing like the violent man who'd torn through their enemies to keep her safe just months ago. "He," Luca corrected with a smirk she could hear in his voice. "It's definitely a boy." Isabella turned in his arms, facing the man who'd changed her entire world. His dark eyes, usually hard and calculating, held only warmth when they looked at her. The dangerous aura that typically surrounded him had softened, though she knew it would return the moment they left their sanctuary. "Girl or boy, this baby is going to be loved," she said, running her hands up his chest. "Even if their father is the most stubborn man I've ever met." Luca's laugh was deep and rich, a sound few had ever heard. "Says the woman who tried to run from me." His grip tightened slightly, possessively. "That worked out well for you, didn't it?" Isabella rolled her eyes, but couldn't hide her smile. "You're never going to let me forget that, are you?" "Never," he promised, leading her inside the villa. The interior was all cream-colored walls and plush furnishings, nothing like the stark modernity of his penthouse in New York. This place was their escape, where Luca could be just a man in love with his woman, not the feared leader of the Hells Angels. They settled onto the oversized couch, Isabella tucking herself against his side. His hand found its way back to her stomach, protective and possessive as always. The baby moved again, and Luca's face softened in a way that still amazed her. "I never thought I'd have this," he admitted quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "My world, it's not made for happiness like this." Isabella placed her hand over his. "Your world is what we make it, Luca. You've shown me that. The man everyone fears isn't the same man who holds me at night, who talks to our baby, who looks at me like I'm the most precious thing in his world." "You are," he said fiercely, turning to face her fully. "You and this baby. You're everything. The club, the power, none of it means anything compared to you." His words made her heart skip. This was the Luca only she knew, the one who could be gentle, who could love with the same intensity he brought to everything else in his life. She remembered the first time she'd seen him, how terrified she'd been of the darkness in his eyes. Now she saw past it to the man beneath, the one who'd move heaven and earth to keep her safe. "We've come so far," Isabella mused, tracing the tattoos on his forearm. "From that night at the club to here, sometimes it feels like a dream." Luca caught her hand, bringing it to his lips. "No dream," he said firmly. "This is real, Isabella. You're mine, this baby is mine, and I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt that." The intensity in his voice made her shiver. This was the man she'd fallen for. Dangerous and devoted, capable of both violence and tenderness. He'd shown her both sides of his world, and she'd chosen to stay, chosen to love him despite everything. "I know," she whispered, leaning in to kiss him softly. "We're yours, Luca. Always." I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story, and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.